You're listening to WVOF 88.5 Fairfield University Radio, and this is The Sweep with yours truly, Cole Townsend.
And I'm Ali Haidar.
So, The Sweep is an unapologetically progressive talk show in which we discuss wedge issues and a range of topics with a progressive perspective, one that is very rarely conveyed through traditional mainstream media. Before we begin tonight, I want to give a quick shout-out to our good friend Jay Glover, who recently appeared on the show. He'll be hosting a faith talk at Fairfield University Commuter Lounge Wednesday the 17th at 6:30 p.m. There will be food and cross-faith talk, so come on down and check it out. On today's episode, we've got a wide range of topics to discuss, including Candace Owens and white nationalism, Ilhan Omar and the false controversy following her, Katie Porter's smackdown of wealth inequality in a congressional hearing, interesting 2020 developments, and the extradition of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. Thanks for joining us. Alright, so I guess we should kick it off, as I mentioned, by talking about Candace Owens and the hearing on white nationalism. And so, just to give a little context, that is basically what it's about. It was a hearing on white nationalism. The Republicans, being the minority in the House, were able to choose their own witnesses. And oddly enough, they chose Candace Owens, which is weird for a few reasons, because one, she is someone who is pretty racist and Islamophobic in her rhetoric, but two, she was literally just cited in the Christchurch Shooters Manifesto a few weeks back as, a source of inspiration for the crime that he committed. So it's rather interesting that they chose to put her on. But regardless, I want to play you guys a little clip of Democratic Representative Ted Lieu calling out Candace Owens in the hearing and bringing up some of her recent controversial comments in her face. So take a listen and we'll come back and discuss.
In congressional hearings, the minority party gets to select its own witnesses. And of all the people that Republicans could have selected, they picked Candace Owens. I don't know Miss Owens. I'm not going to characterize her. I'm going to let her own words do the talking. So I'm going to play for you the first 30 seconds of a statement she made about Adolf Hitler.
I agree. I actually don't have any problems at all with the word nationalism. I think that it gets, the definition gets poisoned by elitists that actually want globalism. Globalism is what I don't want. So when you think about, whenever we say nationalism, the first thing people think about, at least in America, is Hitler. He was a National Socialist. But if Hitler just wanted to make Germany great and have things run well, okay, fine. Problem is that he had dreams outside of Germany. He wanted to globalize. He wanted everybody to be German, everybody to be speaking German.
All right, so my first question is to Ms. Hirschenoff. Ms. Owens said, quote, if Hitler just wanted to make Germany great and have things run well, okay, fine. The problem is that he had dreams outside of Germany. So when people try to legitimize Adolf Hitler, does that feed into white nationalist ideology?
It does, Mr. Lieu. I know that Ms. Owens distanced herself from those comments later, but we expressed great concern over the original comments.
Would you like time to respond to that?
Yes, I think it's pretty apparent that Mr. Lieu believes that black people are stupid and will not pursue the full clip in its entirety. He purposely presented an extracted clip.
The witness will suspend for a moment. It is not proper to refer disparagingly or to a member of the committee. The witness will not do that again. Witness may continue.
Sure.
Okay, and so...
Boom.
Boom. Yeah, absolutely. Basically, Ted Lieu, like I said, just played a clip of Candace Owens establishing that Hitler really did nothing wrong, and his one cardinal sin was not, the whole Holocaust thing. It was the fact that he wanted to be globalist and expand outside of his state, which that's not even really what the definition of globalism is. But Ali, I take it you have a few hot takes on it, so what do you have to say on this?
So let's just establish this, right? America has a rising hate crime problem, and it seems like when Congress had this hearing, it seems like our disjointed Congress has finally taken notice of it. The hearing that you may have all heard was from the House Judiciary Committee, in which they held a hearing on the rise of hate crimes and white nationalism. Last year, the FBI released a report in November 2018, and they released the hate crime statistics for 2017. And they found that there was an increase of 17% in reported hate crimes. So one would hope that both sides, Republicans and Democrats, could contribute meaningful and active dialogue towards this rising issue. But like, I guess, most topics in American politics, this was a bad presumption. Democrats brought representatives from the Anti-Defamation League, like the Senior Vice President for Policy, Eileen Hirshinoff, who you guys heard in the congressional deposition that Colin just played, and Dr. Muhammad Abu Salha, a father who lost his 2 daughters in an anti-Muslim hate crime. On the other hand, Republicans brought Candace Owens, a conservative activist, like Colin mentioned, was cited in the New Zealand Terrorist Manifesto, which I believe happened almost 3 weeks, almost a month now.
Very recently, and before that, the comments that were played, they were maybe a month out.
Yeah,
the shooting.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, and then they also brought Morton Klein, who wasn't in that clip, who is the president of the Zionist Organization of America, and so this was nothing more than the Republican and American conservative movement's blatant endorsement of anti-Muslim and arguably anti-Arab hysteria that has rocked American politics since the swearing-in of Congress.
Of course.
And, you really see this, and I'll talk more about this in a bit, but with Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, but the congressional hearing effectively revealed the true hateful nature of the Republican Party, right? As if we didn't know that before, right? And this is just conveyed through the people that they brought to the hearing.
Absolutely. And before we do move on and get to Ilhan Omar, because there's a lot to talk about there, for sure, I want to point out the fact that you heard in the clip, Candace Owens asserted that Ted Lieu believes black people are stupid and are too unintelligent to pursue the full clip for the full context. Trust me, watching the full clip is no less nauseating, and
it actually makes her look worse.
It does make her look worse, and I think it's rather interesting because Candace Owens right there was trying to have a Clarence Thomas moment. In 1991, when Clarence Thomas was, being considered for his Supreme Court confirmation, and Anita Hill came out and accused him of, workplace misconduct and sexual harassment for years on end, he referred to the case against him as a public lynching. And the entire narrative around his confirmation completely changed after that, and everyone felt behind him. And she really tried to do that by asserting that, Ted Lieu thinks black people are dumb. The only issue is that Candace Owens is not a very smart individual, and she really could not have that same effect. She could not have that same impact, especially because the hearing was not specifically geared towards black people. This was not on BET. This was not, something specifically for, African Americans. This was a general hearing about white nationalism.
And, the irony is that Owens, like we mentioned, so she was in that Christchurch Terrorist Manifesto. She's also made, super anti-Muslim comments. Like, for instance, she said, quote, Europe will become a Muslim-majority continent by 2050. Or when she falsely stated that there has, quote, there has never been a Muslim-majority country where Sharia law was not implemented.
Yeah, she talks about the birth rates, too.
She
is always like a white nationalist dog whistle.
She amplifies white nationalist ideology on her platform for the organization which she works with Charlie Kirk on Turning Points USA. And, just given her character, Republicans have complete disdain for the Muslim community. I mean, they had Candace Owens in the same congressional hearing to a father who lost his 2 Muslim daughters because of a hate crime. The utter disrespect, they essentially gave a middle finger to the community.
No, absolutely. And, speaking of giving a middle finger to the community, there's been a lot going on once again, unfortunately, with Ilhan Omar, who's been dragged into another, false batch of controversy. So, Ali, could you please enlighten us and tell us all about that?
So, as you guys may have known, if you come from the show, Ilhan Omar has been the subject of controversy. She's been smeared as an anti-Semite, and she's been called out by the president, and she has not yet completely been defended by the Democratic Party, as I'll get into this. And so more recently, I guess the recent controversy, on March 23rd, she gave a speech to the Council on American Islamic Relations in a banquet in California, in which she conveyed the discomfort that Muslim Americans have been living with since 9/11. She described 9/11 as, quote, something that some people did something, unquote. And, well, I'll admit those quotes are coming out of context because, and like I mentioned before, she was talking about the discomfort how Muslim Americans, because some people did something, we all have to pay the price for it. Essentially, what she was arguing.
It's been ascribed unto the entire community as if it is original sin.
Exactly. And so whatever one's interpretation of Omar's comments, like you can purposely take these quotes out and take them out of context and look at them, and that would just be like that would be idiotic to do, right? She's been the subject of virulent attention towards her, which has been extremely vile and venomous. The rhetoric being thrown at her has fermented into death threats levied against her. Rhetoric from conservative commentators, for instance, our favorite network, Fox News, Brian Kilmeade, deemed her as anti-American, right, in regard to her comments about 9/11. The president, too, even took a huge step. He singled out this congresswoman when he tweeted out an egregious video of her comments with, like, he overlaid it with, like, 9/11, right, making it seem as if, like, she completely threw the terrorist attack away.
The New York Post has been no better in that respect.
Especially in the New York Post. Any Fox News, the New York Post, these are media outlets owned by Robert Murdoch, right? Murdoch, right? And these, there's something sinister behind it, right? I don't know what this man is thinking. He's super senile, like he's super old. So I don't know what he's trying to push. I want to say
actually that there's something deep within his heart that is evil.
Exactly. No, you're right. And so if this entire debacle didn't convey the conservative movement's like rabid hostility towards the American Muslim population, like we mentioned, the congressional hearing did. And it's just disgusting how the rhetoric that's been thrown at Ilhan Omar. And let me just mention, it's because of the suburban liberals who came out and opened the door when they joined the smear campaign in calling her an anti-Semite. And I know a lot of liberals actually met. We actually met people who were critical of Ilhan Omar, but had were sickened at the thought that they had a common cause with the president, and they were discussing about how it's gone to an extreme. And to be fair, they were the ones who opened the door, helped open the door. In a way, it's always these suburban. People. I don't want to say suburban, but it's always like this group of liberals that always try to play both sides. Pelosi would be a great example of this.
I think definitely, and we've talked about this a lot on the show, but a tenet of neoliberalism and like modern day liberal ideology is a real lack of positive positive fiscal policy. And so as a result, they focus rather artificially on some of these social justice causes and these identity politics to go along with it. And so that's what we're seeing. We're seeing this identity politics where we're, defending the Jewish community, which is great if the Jewish community is under threat, but they're really not from Ilhan Omar. And as a result, we're singling out, rather ironically, a Muslim woman, one of the only Muslim black women in Congress, and alienating her excessively.
Yeah, going off that, so the FBI statistic I was talking about earlier, the congressional hearing, in terms of like religious bias, hate crimes, anti-Semitic hate crimes were actually on the rise. I think they comprise like 50% of them. So when they accuse Ilhan Omar, and we've discussed on the show before, when you accuse someone in bad faith of being anti-Semitic when they are truly criticizing the pro-Israeli lobby or the state of Israel, you are trivializing actual events of anti-Semitism, and you are not doing justice.
Yeah.
And one thing I wanted to do was, I don't want to go completely back on the congressional hearing, but what was ironic was the congressional hearing was live streamed on YouTube and Facebook, right? And YouTube had to shut down the comments of their live stream because there were white nationalists in the feed commenting about Congressman Jerry Nadler, who's the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. And it's not only Congress that has to do something; it's also these platforms. Now, look, I'm not trying to lead on to something in regard to free speech or anything, but I think it's fair to say that these platforms, YouTube and Facebook, Twitter, when they allowed the president to post out that horrible clip of Ilhan Omar, they have a very significant hand in fermenting and like fostering this like the alt-right presence online.
Well, look, I would argue that Twitter is doing enough to censor people. Just look at poor Devin Nunes.
Poor Devin Nunes. He's I wonder how his lawsuit's going.
I mean, his mom constantly admonishes him. It's pretty embarrassing. It kind of ruins his whole national stage thing.
What was it? He got mad because someone made a parody Twitter account with like a rabbit.
Of him called Devin Nunes' mom and Devin Nunes' cow.
Oh.
And so he, as far as he's concerned, Twitter has propped up these bots, if not created them, in an attempt to somehow dismantle his free speech. And so he started a lawsuit against that. But
what a snowflake!
What a snowflake! Absolutely, and they can, they blame the left for this, rampant sensitivity. But moving beyond that to yet another congressional hearing, there was a rather interesting occurrence recently, wherein freshman Democratic Congresswoman Katie Porter called out the J.P. Morgan Chase CEO James Damone. And essentially, right, just to give you some context before I play this video, James Damone is the CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, as I mentioned, and since the last several decades, executives have come to make 300 times what the average worker has, while their real wages have actually not really risen at all. While their real wages have not really risen at all, which is quite problematic, and as a result, we've seen, this very egregious income inequality. And so, Katie Porter, what she does during this hearing is she does a really great job of tackling the issue by citing this woman who is working for his company, getting paid their base salary, and has absolutely no money, without even having any expenses regarding, just human things like recreation or extra care for her daughter or, any sort of recreational activity for her children or anything like that. Just trying to cover the very basics of life cannot on a salary that she's making. And so we're going to play the video and then we'll get back and discuss.
Mr. Diamond, you know how to spend $31 million a year in salary, and you can't figure out how to make up a $567 a month shortfall. This is a budget problem you cannot solve. You're an expert on financial statements, and you run a $2.6 trillion bank. I know you're good at numbers, and you've shared lots of opinions recently about how the U.S. should budget its resources, how families should budget their resources, and so I'd like to ask for your help on a problem. I went to Monster.com, and I found a job in my hometown of Irvine at JP Morgan Chase. It pays $16.50 an hour, and so I wondered if I could, if you'd indulge me, would you do the math on this and you do the $16.50 out at 40 hours a week for 52 weeks a year, it comes out to an income of $35,070. Now this bank teller, her name is Patricia. She has one child who's 6 years old. She claims the one dependent after tax. She has $29,100. We divide that by 12. She rents a one-bedroom apartment. She and her daughter sleep together in the same room. In Irvine, California, that average one-bedroom apartment is going to be $1,600. She spends $100 on utilities. Take away the $1,700, and she has net $725. She's like me. She drives a 2008 minivan and has gas. $400 for car, expenses, and gas. Net $325. The Department of Agriculture says a low-cost food budget, that is ramen noodles, a low food budget is $400. That leaves her $77 in the red. She has a Cricket cell phone, the cheapest cell phone she can get for $40. She's in the red $117 a month. She has after-school childcare because the bank is open during normal business hours. That's $450 a month. That takes her down to negative $567 per month. My question for you, Mr. Diamond, is how should she manage this budget shortfall while she's working full-time at your bank?
I don't know. I'd have to think about that.
Would you recommend that she take out a J.P. Morgan Chase credit card and run a deficit?
I don't know. I'd have to think about it.
Would you recommend that she overdraft at your bank and be charged overdraft fees?
I don't know. I'd have to think about it.
So I know you have a lot
I'd love to call up and have a conversation about her financial affairs and See if we can be helpful.
See if you can find a way for her to live on less than the minimum that I've described.
Just be helpful.
Well, I appreciate your desire to be helpful, but what I'd like you to do is provide a way for families to make ends meet so that little kids who are 6 years old living in a one-bedroom apartment with their mother aren't going hungry at night because they're $567 short from feeding themselves, clothing them. We allow no money for clothing. We allow no money for school lunches. We allow no money for field trips, no money for medical, no money for prescription drugs, nothing. And she's short $567 already. Mr. Diamond, you know how to spend $31 million a year in salary, and you can't figure out how to make up a $567 a month shortfall. This is a budget problem you cannot solve.
Boom. So anyway, for the viewers listening, I just switched over mics. I got a few text messages saying that the mic was sounding a little derpy. I think it sounds better. For those of you listening, please message me or Colin to know. But anyway, I'm just loving all these videos coming out. First with Ted Lieu, and then with this Congresswoman just putting these people in their places, really.
Yeah, I gotta say, I hadn't heard of Katie Porter prior to this incident. I imagine not too many people had outside of her district. But I'm really glad to see yet another very strong female freshman congresswoman coming in, just taking the stage and just knocking it out of the park during these congressional hearings, because Congress for too long has gotten away with not doing its job and not holding these people accountable and not speaking truth to power because they've been taking money from power. And so I'm really glad to see that going on.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's another thing to be more thankful for this new group of freshmen coming in. And because it really is like encouraging, right? And, you know, I really wish we could see his reaction, you know, maybe like an hour after the hearing or when he leaves, because he got RKO'd or something. Like,
he got wrecked.
He got destroyed. So good for Katie Porter. You know, we need more freshmen like that. The only question is, I wonder if Nancy Pelosi is going to come out and like criticize her or refuse to defend her when the president attacks her.
You know what? I think for now she'll be good. If she keeps on this trajectory and she ends up being, you know, too accomplished, a few months into her first session, I'm sure Nancy Pelosi will come out and say, "Hey, there's more than 6 of them. You know, there's more than 6."
Absolutely, and I just think that this is really good for the Democratic Party. I don't think Katie Porter's with the Justice Democrats issue.
I'd have to look that up. I can't say for sure right now, but regardless, she makes a great point, because the fact of the matter is, I said it again. Well, she talks about it, right? She discusses the fact that it would be very profitable for, Mr. Damone's own company, Diamond's own company, if she, an employee of J.P. Morgan Chase, were to run a deficit and draw into credit from that bank. Or overdraft, right? And so it's like a reverse of the Ford model, where, Ford found that if he paid his employees well, they could buy into the company's product and, he would have a built-in market. They decided, hey, in the banking industry, if we pay them terribly, they're going to have to rely on our terrible credit services, and we get to, make money off of the labor we're exploiting them for, and we also get to make money on the fact that they don't have enough money to live afterwards and need to rely on us in this cycle of, self-defeat and self-destruction. And the Esquire article this comes from, actually, big props to Esquire, because I just want to read a little bit of their introduction, because it was just a beautiful takedown of not just the right in their favor towards corporatism, but also the left. So here it goes. At this point, a citizen of the United States would be forgiven for losing track of what exactly Congress is supposed to do. Believe it or not, the remittance for senators and congressmen is not to wait for lobbying firms on K Street to send over a tax bill in the afternoon so that they can hammer it out. So they can hammer it through a few hours later in the middle of the night before anyone's had a chance to look at it. The Senate's job is not to find a way to confirm the president's judicial nominee on the sole basis that they are conservative, regardless of their credentials as a jurist. A congressman's job is not to make tax filers' lives harder and less affordable because TurboTax wants to maximize profits. and made some campaign donations. For that last one, thank Democrats. And all too often, Republicans get written off as the party for, corporations and corporate favors. And while they are certainly a worse offender than the Democratic Party, the mainstream, Democratic caucus is not much better. I want to point out, Beto O'Rourke has traditionally been the second biggest recipient of fossil fuel money, right? So the Democrats do not have clean hands in this too, and I'm just really glad to see an article take fire at that.
Shout out to Esquire, but also, shout out to C-SPAN. I think C-SPAN, if you look at their Twitter feed, they release the whole, hearing for whatever, but then they also post, clips that kind of give, an oomph in the back. I think the Katie Porter clip was one of them. I saw it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a strong clip. It's very compelling.
And it's another thing, the economy is doing well, right? If you want to look at certain indicators, right, unemployment is 3.8% or something. But the real question is, corporations are still getting away with paying their workers low, bad wages.
And I think an issue with that is it definitely brings up the fact that we need to reevaluate how we diagnose the health of our economy, because we focus too much on unemployment and GDP. The fact of the matter is, France is known as having a very stagnant GDP and being a very stagnant country. If you subtract the just insane growth of the 1% over the last several decades, our GDP has actually been more stagnant than that of France. So just think about that for a minute. And more than that, when it comes to unemployment, a big issue is not just that people have jobs. People have jobs, great, but they're underemployed. People who have good degrees are working jobs that, really do not dignify their education, and they are not getting paid enough, especially when you add on top of that things like copays for medical expenses, right? Whereas if we implemented a Medicare for All plan like the one that Bernie Sanders wants, we could be saving $2 trillion over 10 years and saving people, 16% of their annual pay?
I believe there is a definitely, you definitely save more. It might be 16%. I'm not sure about the specific figure, but, here's the thing. The fact of the matter, and I'm quoting Colin right here, is that Medicare for All, right? For instance, you have a premium of $500 per month before Medicare for All. Medicare for All gets implemented, now you have a premium of around $300 a month, right? So you're essentially saving. Of course, your premium doesn't go away, but you're paying it in the form of a tax, or however Sanders wants to fund it, which I believe through a tax.
Absolutely.
So it's all about how you frame the ideology, which Sanders, I think, has done a pretty good job. For those of you listening, I don't know if anyone saw in the Fox News segment where he went on Fox News' town hall. I believe it was Brett Byron and it was another co-host of his. They were trying to do a little "how we gotcha" moment to Sanders when they asked the question to the audience: raise your hand if you have private health insurance. Everyone raised their hand. Raise your hand if you would like to see Medicare for All, which will phase out that private health insurance. Everyone still raised their hand, and it really shows how we can reach the other side. I think on the show a few weeks ago, one of our episodes, we talked about how Tom Perez, the head of the DNC, made the decision to bar Fox News from broadcasting the Democratic primary debates, which are a long way from now, but it really shows that we can really reach the 10% of viewers. And by the way, the town hall wasn't just filled up with Bernie Sanders supporters. The first person to ask Sanders a question was a student who works for Turning Point USA, a conservative organization.
Wow.
So that really shows you the demographics. But anyway, that was a little digression, but you were right. We need new indicators for the economy. The point about underemployment is completely true. People who graduate college go and work McDonald's with their, you could say accounting degree when they should be utilizing it. So that's an issue.
Especially, egregious actually is, you may not be aware of it, but the fact of the matter is, your first job post-college, when you step out into the world after you've finalized your education, tends to determine how much money you make over the course of your career. And when you think about all the college graduates who got out and finished during the financial crash of 2008 and the aftermath, and people who were therefore not able to get good quality jobs that they should have with their degrees, and who still have student loans on top of that, they will be impacted by that most likely for the rest of their careers. And so we definitely need better metrics. The Gini coefficient, for example, is something we're both fans of, and that measures inequality. And just an interesting tidbit about that before we move on is that in 1776, which was a time in which there was slavery in the country, there was more economic equality, even accounting for slavery, than in 2012. And that is hugely problematic. For anyone who says that we should not be taxing the rich because, who are we to take away their profits, you need to understand that a system does not work if the vast majority of people are being left behind. If they are making money for these people, it's going to the top, and none of it is flowing around. No one else is being lifted up. The whole point of trickle-down was a rising tide was supposed to rise all boats. And we've seen time and time and time again that that is not true. The only time we saw any economic recovery during a time of tax cuts was briefly during the Reagan period, and it was not because of tax cuts, it was because of low interest rates, primarily.
Which was also short-term, whatever economic boom you had there, because we also, I think we had a recession.
The other thing was, because we had a recession, it was high government spending. Go figure.
Yeah, I mean, trickle-down economics, from my understanding, runs on this idea of deficit spending. You cut back taxes, but you spend everything else the same. Which, I mean, given the America's debt today, I mean, you can see how well that's been working out.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, just like how George H.W. Bush, George Sr. said, as he became the vice president for Reagan. Before that, in the Republican primaries, trickle-down economics, or Reaganomics, whatever you want to call it, is simply voodoo economics.
Trumped up trickle-down, as Hillary Clinton called it.
Exactly. But we'll definitely have to see. I mean, I'd love to go, because we are both economic majors. So I'd definitely love to see what other indications. And, for those of you listening, if you are an economics professor from anywhere around the tri-state area, the greater New York area, feel free to come on the show.
Absolutely. Now, I did not have this on the docket, actually, but since you brought it up, the fact that Bernie Sanders went on and spoke to Fox, let's talk about that for a minute, because, as you mentioned, Tom Perez in the DNC chose to essentially bar Fox from hosting in the Democratic primaries because they're concerned with the relationship between Fox News, its staff and hosts, and President Donald Trump. But Bernie Sanders came on regardless as an independent candidate, or rather, not as an independent candidate, but as a candidate independent of the Democratic Party in that decision. And what do you think of that?
So I'm a little torn behind, because the reason why Tom Perez came out and barred Fox News from commenting or airing the Democratic primaries is because Fox News is a disgusting network. They are trash. They have absolutely nothing to give. However, to give them some credit, and they are commentary, but they don't brand themselves as like that, and that's a problem we see with most of the mainstream media. Fox News propagates propaganda. I mean, the network was sued by the City Council of Paris for propagating the lies of no-go zones, and so I could see the argument to why we should bar Fox News. Why we should. However, after seeing the Bernie Sanders town hall, it just seems to me that we can reach maybe whoever's watching on that screen, because you've heard it's kind of the vacuum, right? Fox News viewers, and it's not only Fox News. You have people MSNBC, and I'll be, for example, myself. I'll admit the most of my media that I get my news, the most of the commentary I watch is on the progressive side. Now I acknowledge that, and I try to diversify as I should. However, where I do fail in doing so. However, I'm not the 60-year-old Fox News viewer that consistently watches the cable news over the last 10, 20 years, right? And consistently being fed this propaganda. So I could see that, and I am still a little iffy about it. But after seeing Bernie Sanders going on there, It really is. And besides, the president kind of got jealous about it on Twitter. If you saw.
Yeah.
He said, "Why is Crazy Bernie on there?" And he kind of said Fox News and himself. He kind of combined the two and said "we." And I was like, "What do you mean by we?" Right? Are you exposing something, Mr. President? So
he's getting the shakes. He has separation anxiety.
I have mixed feelings about it, but I'm definitely leaning towards just let them air it. Right? I mean, there's a case to be made when the president blocks people on Twitter because of free speech, and I think the case, now not exactly the same, can also be made when the DNC refuses to allow a network to air. I mean, they have the right to do it, I guess, but I just think that we can reach the viewer who's been consuming and indulging themselves with all this propaganda. So it definitely seems like we should be on Fox News. And you never know, that might change. But however, I have the feeling that because the establishment does not like Bernie Sanders and they see that he did pretty well in the town hall and he's got everyone talking about it, they might stick with their decision to bar Democratic debates on Fox News so that way no Fox News viewer sees Sanders and his policies on the platform.
Potentially. Also, I can't imagine them wanting to, bend and do something because Bernie did it. But, that actually segues, even though this was not a planned segment to talk about at all, very neatly into, a brief discussion about 2020 updates. Because there's a lot going on there. And I think the first of which we should talk about would be Pete Buttigieg. He is, the South Bend, Indiana mayor who has gotten a lot of media coverage attention.
A lot.
And I know I spoke about him briefly on the show and described him as a progressive. After looking more into him, I'm inclined to retract that statement. And Ali, you were against it from the beginning. Nick Toledo, who was on the show a few weeks back, says that your political insights are usually 2 weeks ahead. So you usually say something 2 weeks before the rest of the media hype catches on to it. So let's hear about it. Why don't you think of him as a progressive?
So I was skeptical of Pete Buttigieg from the beginning because, first of all, I didn't know who he was, right? And then I was a little more him. He's a really charismatic guy. He speaks a bunch of languages. I mean, yesterday when the cathedral in France, Notre Dame, was burning down, he spoke to a French news outlet and spoke French, and that's been circulating on Twitter. My only issue is, and this also isn't on the docket, but I've seen a lot of things about Pete Buttigieg that makes me a little iffy. For instance, he gave an interview with Vox in which he gave an anti-policy stance, where he said that when the interviewer asked him about why hasn't he come out with certain policies, he kind of responded saying, we need to focus on the philosophy. We need to focus on attaching that philosophy to policy, but we really need to focus on philosophy, something like that. And he says that the right has been able to do this. So that is an anti-policy position. Also, and this was something I saw from a mile away when I first heard about Pete Buttigieg. I didn't hear about Pete Buttigieg from your typical news network a month and a half ago. I heard it. There's a representative in Fairfield County who works in the Connecticut General Assembly. And she's a really sweet person, really cares about it. But I describe her as a centrist. In a way, not in the sense of
which representative is this?
Representative Vahey.
Okay.
133rd district in Fairfield.
Mm-hmm.
And she had posted something on her Facebook page or Twitter about donating to Pete Buttigieg because she wants a diversity of ideas, which I totally get, right? We should definitely have a diversity of ideas, and I'd be willing to donate to Pete Buttigieg if that would get him on the platform. However, I follow her on Twitter. I get most of my information about Pete Buttigieg from her because she's on retweeting. She had a watch party the other day. And there's a little something, I guess, I don't want to say unnerving because that's the thing, but there's something going on when you have suburban individuals, especially in politics, coming out and supporting a candidate who we know is center. I mean, and what surprises me is how much track he's gotten. And I get it, he's a charismatic guy, but also because I saw a perfect graph on Twitter, and it's not on the docket, but it was showing when candidates announced their candidacy, and then the media coverage after. And mind you, Pete Buttigieg just announced it a few days ago.
Yeah.
He was exploring a run, so...
Even before he announced, he was getting disproportionate news coverage. Look at a Richard Ojeda, for example. Richard Ojeda was the first person to enter the race and the first person to leave because there was no coverage of him. I don't know anyone who knows who Ojeda is.
Exactly, and Pete Buttigieg, I mean... there's certain things I agree with him because, I mean, they're just stars. I mean, he's more on the left than compared to anyone else on the right,
Mm-hmm.
just obviously. So I was just always skeptical, right? I'm always skeptical when you have liberal elites, especially in Fairfield County, coming up.
One of the richest in the country.
Exactly,
yeah.
coming up and supporting someone. Especially when you have other people such as Kamala Harris or even Joe Biden, who hasn't announced, but people who fit that agenda more. But perhaps because Joe Biden hasn't announced. So that's why I saw it. I was always skeptical. Also, I was following a lot about Kyle Kulinski, who we was talking about on Secular Talk, and I follow him on Twitter, and he was also skeptical. So his skepticism rubbed on me. So I don't know if Pete Buttigieg. I mean, I think it's wonderful. I'm really excited that we have an openly gay man running for president because I think that's perfect for the U.S. However, but I like as we talked in the show, I'm not worried too much about identity. I'm more worried about policy, and that's something Pete Buttigieg lacks.
Yeah. And now, that's actually a wonderful analysis of the whole situation, just eloquently phrased.
Thank you.
Now, I do want to talk, I guess rather briefly, if we want to get to Julian Assange in any meaningful level, about some updates regarding Elizabeth Warren, and I guess one with Tulsi Gabbard. I'll start with Tulsi Gabbard since it's rather quick. Tulsi Gabbard got the $65,000 necessary contributions to make it to the debate stage. Awesome, great for her. Moving on, since we really don't have much time, Elizabeth Warren, not too long ago it came out that she was coming in third in the polls in Massachusetts. So in her own home state, she had failed to create a firewall. And that's really concerning because while I do prefer, Bernie Sanders a little bit more over Warren because of, support for Medicare for All, I do view her as someone who picked up Bernie's platform and ran with it and created many new ideas since, whereas Bernie is still running the same ideas as 2016, which were still great.
But she's made it her own.
Yeah, so she's gotten her own touch on it. She's moved far beyond that even. And I'm going to get into that a little bit right now. So before we do, though, I do want to say that, yes, she came third, but there is potentially a large margin of error because it was a small group of people that were polled, but it's still worrisome. Moving beyond that,
well, just to hand off that, and this kind of ties in what we talk about Pete Buttigieg and the disproportionate media coverage, I think one reason why Warren might be lacking in the polls isn't necessarily because people don't like her, but it's because she's come out with all these policies and the media refuses to cover it.
Yeah, and she's come up with amazing policy. So many great things, really, which is why I said that she took Bernie's platform and ran with it and has really made it her own. One of which I'd actually love to talk about right now because she recently proposed something in a blog post called the Real Corporate Profit Tax. And so this is a marginal tax that applies to the 1,200 or so corporations in America that report over $100 million in profits to investors. And so basically it would be a marginal tax rate of 7% for every dollar past $100 million. And here's why this is a great tax policy. Because it really should have zero loopholes. The numbers that corporations report to investors and IRS are rather different. The numbers that corporations report to investors are usually pretty spot on because, one, they're legally obligated to do so, and two, you want to have a high stock price. And if you're reporting high profits, you're going to have a high stock price. You're going to be able to put that towards stock buybacks and, give you and your executive pals huge bonuses. So you always want to make sure you have the highest number that you're telling investors. Whereas with the IRS, when that number is being used to tax you, you're going to report lower. And there are copious loopholes to assist, the people in doing that. And so this is great because, that really cuts out the loopholes. And that makes it so that they're actually going to be contributing this money. It's not a lot of corporations that will be doing that, only 1,200. And that means that it is an effective way to tax corporations without harming small businesses who may be struggling to get a hold or struggling to pay their employees. So I'm really appreciative of that all around. And that definitely is something that does need to get some attention because it's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, taxing corporations, I think, if we're going to tax someone or a being, it's definitely corporations. I had a great exchange with a professor at Fairfield University, a great guy. Professor Dr. LeClaire, sent him a video about David Pakman. David Pakman has a show in which he talked about how we could fund certain things, by reversing certain tax cuts, by implementing certain tax cuts. And he just said, here's a bunch of things you can pick and choose, right? I thought it was a super interesting video. I sent it to Dr. LeClaire. And so Dr. LeClaire was talking about how he responded saying that these ideas can work and they look fine. However, it would result in something like too much taxation, and like he said, something about a Keynesian death spiral, which just happens when you tax consumers too much, and I guess the economy shrinks. And that's how it is, right? When people, that's like the business cycle when it comes to Keynesian economics, right? To do like fiscal policy, you either raise government spending or you cut back taxes, because most recessions, in a way, come from low exhaust demand. But the thing is, what about if we just tax the corporations? Because corporations aren't necessarily buying things. Yes, they might be investing, and investing is helps the economy. However, I don't think necessarily it would lead to that death spiral that he was talking about. So I really like how Warren really comes out and does this.
When it comes to, investing, there's marginal benefits towards, investing in savings, right? Mm-hmm. There's a marginal benefit at a certain point. It's not doing that much. And also, you get more economic stimulation when money's in the pockets of the people at the bottom. Because, on the topic of margins, someone who makes, $1,000 a month, if you give them an extra $100, that means a lot more to them, in real dollars than it does for someone who is making 100,000, right?
Absolutely.
So they're more likely to do more with that. They're more likely to, buy a new car, try to go to school, save towards starting a business, anything like that. So that's really great. And unfortunately, it's looking like we might not have time to discuss Julian Assange and the debacle there, so we might have to play catch up next week. But I promise it's not in vain, because we are going to be discussing the most interesting candidate of 2020 by far.
Pete Buttigieg?
No, Beto O'Rourke.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Amy Klobuchar. Close.
Cranky Klobuchar. No. So, all joking aside, Mike Gravel is a man who, to my best understanding, has not gotten nearly as much media coverage as he deserves. But he is a former Alaska senator, right?
Yeah, I think from the...
Who would expect that?
It's been a while. It's from the 69 to 80 something.
Yeah, no, he's been retired for a long time. He was actually in the presidential primary for 2008.
He was.
He was on stage with Clinton, Obama, and Biden, and he was trying to bring up these amazing things to public attention, and they kind of just laughed him off. And he sat there and he simmered, but some teenagers actually reached out to him and they said, hey, we want to start an exploratory campaign for you. Mike Gravel's like, do you know how old I am? Because he's like 88. He's an old dude.
He's old.
And you know what? His exploratory campaign got off the ground to help these teenagers, and now he's here. And I want to read to you just a few. He released a 29-point platform. It was so big it wasn't even a blog post. It's
on Google Docs, yeah.
Yeah. So I want to read to you just a few. Because, oh my god, isn't the progressive holy grail? I actually have like a really dumb smile on my face.
I'm just like, before we get to this, I guess we can answer this after, but has he always been this progressive?
He has. That's what I'm saying. In the 2008 debate stage, they just kind of laughed him off stage because he was trying to bring up some things. It's my understanding, he was against the war, for example, in Iraq. I don't think he was actually in Congress at the time, but he, rhetorically was against it. Great all-around ideas. And before I get into his platform, I want to read some of his amazing tweets. If you want a vision of a future under Cory Booker, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever, and every once in a while it stops for an inspirational lecture on how we should never stop dreaming. Alright, let's see. Hello, young voters. This is a very relatable every woman Kirsten Gillibrand. I do things that other Homo sapiens do. This should paper over the anti-immigrant, anti-Palestinian, pro-Wall Street stances I took when it benefited me politically. And let's see, just one more. Today on the 60th anniversary of the fall of Baghdad, remember the 500,000 Iraqi civilians who died for nothing. Our leaders knew nothing our leaders knew the only thing in Iraq and Al-Qaeda had in common was the letter Q. They must face justice for their war crimes. So, absolutely outstanding. Let me see if I can pull up this amazing platform, because it eludes me right now, and honestly, it was too good to not draw attention to.
I mean, I'm looking at it right now. It looks amazing. I mean...
Yeah, okay. All right. I have it up as well, but Ollie, you want to read some?
Yeah, I mean, so first, I mean, just going off, he wants to abolish the Electoral College.
Woo!
He wants to do national ranked choice voting. He wants to adopt the Wyoming rule, which I haven't heard of, but I guess the Wyoming rule is the principle that the House representation to population ratio must be equal for all states. To do this, the ratio must be set that of the lowest population state, Wyoming. This ensures that no representative has more power than any other representative.
So that's actually really good, and that deals with an issue that we've been having quite a lot. You know, when you look at the Electoral College, for example, we are giving undue power to the smaller southern states and ignoring, you know, vast populations. It's to a point where we call them wasteful margins of victory in the Democratic camp, and that's very common. And so he talks about 12-year term limits for all federal judges, restoring civil rights, abolishing the NSA as part of that. Just wonderful. Withdrawing from the Anglophone only Five Eyes network, you know, awesome.
Departments of Peace and War.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He wants to break up the Homeland Security, the Department of Homeland Security. Self-determining and potential statehood for Puerto Rico and Washington D.C. I think that's very important. You know, re-engaging with multilateral institutions instead of acting on our own in these interventionalist ways that we so often do. Ending the nuclear threat, pursuing non-aggression abroad. He supports, among other things, you know, bringing troops home. He supports the Green New Deal. What else? Because right now I see a lot of his international. I would love to find some of his, you know, domestic economic policy.
Well, it says right. I guess it says right here. I mean, some domestic thing. He wants to have an American National Fund, in which he says that American wealth is overwhelmingly concentrated in the wealthiest 5% of households. The bottom 40% of families own 0.5% of the national wealth, with the top 1% was about 40%. And so he wants to have a social wealth fund in which would put money in Americans' pockets and redistribute wealth. I guess he would do this through an increased estate tax. He's also for breaking up big businesses. He says that the U.S. economy is plagued with monopolies. This one's interesting. He wants to do a national reparations trust fund.
Yes,
it's pretty radical.
Very supportive of reparations. Also, he's so socially democratic. Check this out, right? This is under the heading of the right to own corporate business or cooperative business, right? The United States should institute a policy of the right to own, ensuring that when a company is being sold or is going out of business, the first group that has a chance to buy out the business's assets and IP are the workers themselves. Because how often do workers get, you know, screwed over by these, you know, really greedy tactics? Like, especially, like, if you think of, like, Mitt Romney and his, like, habit of buying companies with, like, leverage buyouts and then liquidating their assets for, you know, the money that brings, and you end up screwing over these everyday working people who need jobs, right? That's
especially
amazing.
No, Mike Gravel, you know, it's a shame he hasn't got much
support.
Most support. I mean, because let's be real. I mean, if people remember the 2008 primary, maybe not the younger people, but I guess the older people. I mean, he probably has better name recognition than possibly some other new candidates running, right?
No, because at the end of the day, name recognition is, you know, largely about who the media has decided to follow and who can get a social media following. Gravel has gotten a social media following. As I've showed you before, his Twitter game is on point, especially for an 88-year-old man. He puts Donald Trump to shame.
He writes his own tweets, by the way.
He does. But at the end of the day, the news still has not given him that much attention. The Atlantic wrote a nice piece about him. A few other places have. He's not getting the mainstream attention that he should.
So I'm thinking he's got name recognition. Of course, he doesn't have name recognition all the way around.
But if you mean like in Congress, you know.
But yeah, I'm talking about in Congress, or even from when, because he was in the Democratic debates in 2008. So if any like I guess older people still remember the 2008 primaries, which I'm sure they will, they probably still will remember Mike Gravel. Which is interesting, so we'll definitely see how he goes.
Well, yeah, absolutely, and I do want to say, Mike Gravel is 88 years old. he understands that he is too old to be president by most metrics. And he doesn't want to be president right now, actually. What he wants is to make it to the debate stage. Because, and this is what third-party candidates usually want to do, right? They want to get out there and they want to push a certain angle, a certain policy stance that usually is not really being taken up by the major parties. Just like Bernie Sanders kind of wanted to push Hillary Clinton further left in 2016, Mike Gravel wants to do that potentially to Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren.
Mm-hmm.
And I have absolutely no problem with that. So, to make it to the debate stage, it's a bit of an arbitrary rule, but you need 65,000 donations. So if you have it in your wallet and in your heart and, in your mind for the country, I would say reach in there, pick out $1 and just throw it. It doesn't even need to be a lot because Mike Gravel does not want to be president. He just wants to get to
just $1. Imagine how funny it would be to have this man on stage.
Personally, I already donated. Ali, I don't know if you...
I haven't donated, but I think I will. I mean, he tweets out, funny stuff. I mean, he's kind of trolling. And I know he's trolling in the sense of the same way as the right, but he's got a good purpose. He wants to go on the debate stage and move it more to the left.
It's like Ocasio-Cortez, but funnier, wherein, he could be, relatable and it doesn't seem stilted and it doesn't seem forced. He could get a message across that is very dense and political and intelligent while also being fun, relatable, and just someone that you actually like. And considering so much of his politics is all about personality, look at the popularity of Beto O'Rourke and Buttigieg, despite having no real clear policy dispositions. Certainly then a man with an amazing personality and even better platform can get some attention. Please, 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 however small a following we have, donate to Mike Gravel. We would love to have him on the debate stage. We would love to have him push the Overton window even further left than it has moved in the last, let's say, 3 years.
Definitely, of course. But it should be interesting to see where the Democratic debates are a year and a half from now or even a year from now.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, we're wrapping up a little bit early, 3 minutes early for a change instead of running late and having Julia, bang outside. But, thanks so much for tuning into the sweep. This is episode 9, I want to say?
This is episode 9.
This is episode 9. We've had, 3 guests on now. We're coming to the end of the semester, but we'll keep doing this throughout the summer. We appreciate so much your attention, your text messages, and your YouTube views.
Mm-hmm.
You could follow us on Twitter. I'm The Sweep Cole.
I'm Lebanese Ali.
All right, with an A, right?
With an A, Lebaenese. And by the way, guys, if you guys are listening, check out our YouTube channel, subscribe. We almost have 100 views on our last episode with Pastor Jay Glover and senior student Bob George. And really tell your friends. We're hoping to get a good following so that way we can have more guests in the future potentially. Also, if you are a conservative watching this show, feel free to reach out to us. We have an email, thesweepwvof@gmail.com. We will be checking our inboxes regularly.
Or if you know us personally, feel free
reach out,
to shoot us a message. We'll try to get the phones working one of these days. So because right now the studio is just ill-equipped. Just to see if we could have people call in, whether they're liberal, lefty, conservative, and want to talk it out. That'd be cool. And once again, big things coming from the sweep. We plan on continuing this into the summer, and we are currently building assets to get a website running, so we have a home online. So certainly, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate your time immensely. Have a lovely evening. You've been listening to WVOF 88.5. This has been The Sweep. I'm Cole Townsend.
And I'm Ali Haidar.
And we're signing off.